David Lindholm, we need to discuss the cash transactions through your branch.
Cash transactions, everything goes through our BSA protocol.
David Lindholm kept his own records. Every dollar processed, every month, every year, written down in pencil in a spiral notebook sitting in his garage. That notebook is now Exhibit A in a federal money laundering case involving $7 million in drug proceeds.
Cash transactions, everything goes through our BSA protocols. I review every alert personally as the compliance officer.
$2.7 million in drug proceeds laundered through
By the end of this conversation, David Lindholm would be in federal custody. The investigation that had brought DEA and IRS criminal investigation agents to his branch office in Albuquerque had been running for more than a year. 4 months of court-authorized wiretaps, 60 hours of branch surveillance footage, a junior teller who had filed 14 suspicious activity reports into a void before she finally went around her own boss. By morning, the branch manager this community had trusted with their paychecks, their mortgages, and their kids' college funds would be charged with laundering more than $2.7 million in cartel money through 4 shell accounts he had personally onboarded. Quick question. When you walk into your bank or your credit union, do you ever wonder who is actually watching the cash that moves through that branch? Most people don't. Most people assume the system is watching itself. Drop a comment and tell me where you bank and whether you've ever stopped to think about the manager sitting behind the glass at the back of the lobby. Subscribe if you're new here. We cover a case like this every single week, and the next one is already in the works. David Allen Lindholm was born in Carlsbad, New Mexico in 1975. His father worked maintenance at the potash mine north of town. His mother kept the books at a feed and supply store on Canal Street. The family lived in a 3-bedroom, flat-roofed ranch on Mesa Verde Drive, with a carport instead of a garage and a swamp cooler on the roof that rattled every June. David was the middle of 3 boys. He learned arithmetic at the kitchen table from his mother, who would lay out the feed store's ledger sheets after dinner and walk him through the columns one at a time. He was good with numbers. By the time he was 12, he was reconciling the feed store's daily cash drawer on Saturdays for $10. By 15, he was running the float spreadsheet his mother had built in Lotus 123 on an off-white compact desktop in the corner of the store's back office. The owner, a man named Earl Patton, who wore a bolo tie every day of his life, wrote David a letter of recommendation when he applied to New Mexico State. Lindholm enrolled at New Mexico State University in Las Cruces in the fall of 1993. He declared finance as a sophomore. He paid for school with a combination of Pell Grants, a Stafford loan, and a part-time job at a Wells Fargo branch on University Avenue, where he started as a teller, earning $7.85 an hour. His performance reviews from that period, pulled by federal investigators years later as part of his background check, describe him as detail-oriented, exceptionally accurate at the cash drawer, and showing aptitude for branch operations beyond his current role. He graduated in May 1997 with a Bachelor of Science in Finance and a 361 grade point average. He married his college girlfriend, Karen Vasquez Lindholm, 3 weeks after graduation in a small ceremony at her parents' house in Mesilla. Karen was a year behind him at NMSU studying elementary education. They moved into a rental duplex on Boots Road, and David took a job as a personal banker at a regional credit union in Las Cruces called Mesilla Valley Federal. $28,000 a year, plus a $500 uniform allowance and quarterly bonuses tied to membership growth. He stayed at Mesilla Valley for 6 years. He was promoted to assistant branch manager in 2000. By 2003, he was running the East Mesa branch with 16 employees under him. Karen had finished her teaching degree and was teaching second grade at a Las Cruces public school. Their first child, a son named Caleb, was born in October 2002. A daughter, Amelia, followed in 2005. The family bought their first house, a 2-story stucco on a cul-de-sac off Sonoma Ranch Boulevard, and David refinanced it twice over the next 4 years to pay down the principal faster than the original amortization schedule would have allowed. In 2006, he took a job in El Paso at a larger institution, GQ, as a branch operations manager. The move was a step up in salary, $62,000 a year, and a step into a more complex regulatory environment, because the El Paso branch he ran sat 8 miles from the Bridge of the Americas and processed remittances and cross-border cash in volumes Mesilla Valley had never touched. It was at GQ that Lindholm first held an official Bank Secrecy Act compliance role. He completed his certified anti-money laundering specialist certification through ACAMS in March 2008. The certificate, framed, would hang on the wall of his office for the next 16 years. His evaluations at GQ described him as thorough on regulatory documentation, comfortable handling structured deposit conversations with members, and an effective coach for newer tellers on CTR thresholds. He was, by every available measure, exactly the kind of mid-career credit union employee the system depended on. He knew the rules. He knew the gaps in the rules. He knew which transactions the software flagged and which it did not. In 2014, Karen's father had a stroke. Her parents lived in Albuquerque, in a small adobe on the west side near the river, and Karen wanted to move closer. David started applying for branch manager positions in Albuquerque that fall. In early 2016, Pinnacle Federal Credit Union, a small independent institution with 7 branches across the metro area, offered him the manager role at their Montgomery Boulevard branch. The salary was $86,000 to start, with the understanding that the role also carried part-time Bank Secrecy Act officer duties, because the credit union was too small to staff a full-time BSA officer at every branch. David accepted. The family moved in May 2016 to a 4-bedroom on Tramway Boulevard with a pool, a casita, and a 3-car garage. He was 41 years old. He had a wife who taught at a charter school in the South Valley, a 13-year-old son in middle school, an 11-year-old daughter who rode horses at a boarding stable in Corrales, and a job that paid him just under $100,000 a year. He coached his son's 7th grade basketball team at La Cueva Christian Academy. He sat on the board of the Albuquerque Youth Basketball League, where he was the treasurer, because of course he was the treasurer. He was the man at the table who understood the budget. Their pastor described him as steady in a Christmas card the year before his arrest. His son's coach described him as the kind of dad who always shows up. His own father, by then retired and living back in Carlsbad, told a reporter after the indictment that he had been proud of David every single day of his life. That was the man David Lindholm appeared to be. That was the man Pinnacle Federal Credit Union promoted in late 2018 to senior branch manager. That was the man who, in January of 2021, sat down with a stranger in the parking lot of a Furs cafeteria off San Mateo Boulevard and listened to a proposal that would unravel everything. The Bank Secrecy Act, passed in 1970, is the spine of the United States anti-money laundering regime. It requires financial institutions to file a currency transaction report, a CTR, for any cash transaction over $10,000. It requires them to file a suspicious activity report, a SAR, whenever a transaction or pattern of transactions suggests a possible illegal source of funds. It prohibits structuring. The deliberate breaking up of cash deposits into amounts just under the $10,000 threshold to avoid triggering a CTR is itself a federal felony under 31 U.S.C. Section 5324, regardless of whether the underlying money is clean. The system depends almost entirely on the people standing at the cash window. The teller is the tripwire. The teller is the first set of eyes on every bundle of hundreds slid across the counter, the first person to notice that a customer who runs a one-truck lawn service has been depositing $9,400 in cash 3 times a week for 6 months. The teller flags, the teller files, the compliance officer reviews. The compliance officer escalates to FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network in Vienna, Virginia. FinCEN routes the SAR to law enforcement. That is the chain. It is supposed to be automatic. It is supposed to be impossible to disable, because the people standing at the cash window are not the people deciding whether to investigate, and the people deciding whether to investigate are not the people standing at the cash window. The separation of duties, what auditors call segregation of duties, is the entire architectural premise. Pinnacle Federal Credit Union on Montgomery Boulevard did not have separation of duties. The Montgomery branch employed 11 full-time staff, 5 tellers, 2 member service representatives, a loan officer, an assistant manager, a part-time accountant who came in 2 days a week, and David Lindholm, who served as branch manager, head of operations, and part-time Bank Secrecy Act officer simultaneously. The dual role was not unusual at credit unions of Pinnacle's size. The institution had $312 million in total assets, which placed it squarely in the category of small credit unions, where the full-time BSA officer was a luxury the budget could not absorb. Regulators had flagged this arrangement in a 2019 NCUA examination. The credit union's board had been advised to consider centralizing BSA review functions at the corporate level. The board had voted to defer the change for budget reasons. The chair of that board, in an interview after the indictment, would say only that the decision had been reviewed annually and had appeared appropriate at the time. What it meant in practice was this. When a teller at the Montgomery branch generated a CTR or a SAR, the document landed on David Lindholm's desk for review. Lindholm signed off on the CTRs that went to FinCEN. Lindholm decided which SRs were escalated and which were marked as resolved without further action. Lindholm was, in his official capacity, the alarm. He was also, in his official capacity, the person who could disable the alarm. The credit union's transaction monitoring software, a third-party platform called Verifin, flagged structured deposit patterns automatically and routed the alerts to the branch BSA officer for review. At Pinnacle's Montgomery branch, that officer was Lindholm. Verifin's alerts on the 4 shell accounts he would personally onboard would, over the next 3 years, total in the hundreds. Every single one of them was reviewed by Lindholm. Every single one of them was closed by Lindholm with the same boilerplate justification. Deposits consistent with documented business activity, no further action required. The system was not broken. The system was working exactly as it had been designed. It just happened that the person operating it had been bought. It started in January 2021. Lindholm would later tell investigators, during his cooperation debriefs, that he had been approached in the parking lot of a Furs cafeteria off San Mateo Boulevard by a man he knew only as Chewy. Chewy was in his mid-30s, wore a black western-cut shirt, drove a clean white F-250 with Doña Ana County plates. Chewy knew Lindholm's name. Chewy knew where he worked. Chewy knew that Karen taught at a charter school in the South Valley and that Caleb played power forward for La Cueva Christian. The pitch was simple. Chewy's people needed accounts. They had cash that needed to move. They were willing to pay a flat 4% of every dollar that went through. They were not asking Lindholm to do anything stupid. They were not asking him to launder it through his own personal accounts. They were asking him to open business accounts in the names of small operating companies that they controlled, accept the deposits from couriers who would come directly to him, and authorize the outgoing wires that moved the money out. The 4% would be paid in cash, in hundreds, delivered to a drop site Lindholm could choose. Lindholm took 2 weeks to decide. He told investigators later that he had told himself, during those 2 weeks, that he was only going to do it once for one account, for 1 quarter, to see what it felt like. He told himself that he could stop at any time. He told himself that the money would pay off the second mortgage on the tramway house, and the lease on Karen's Lexus and Caleb's summer basketball travel team fees, which were $9,000 a year and growing. He said yes on January 19th, 2021. The first account was a landscaping LLC called Sierra Verde Grounds Maintenance. The articles of organization had been filed in Santa Fe 2 weeks earlier with a registered agent address that traced to a UPS store mailbox on Coors Boulevard. The documents Chuy's organization brought to the branch were professionally prepared. The EIN was valid. The driver's license of the listed member manager was a real New Mexico license issued to a real person, a courier named Hector Acevedo, who would 3 years later sit across a table from federal prosecutors and explain the entire scheme. Lindholm onboarded the account on January 22, 2021. He personally entered the customer due diligence file. He personally signed the W-9. He personally checked the box marked low risk. The second account was opened in March 2021. Llano Auto Parts Wholesale, a used auto parts wholesaler with a stated warehouse address in the South Valley that, when investigators visited it in 2024, turned out to be a vacant lot behind a vape shop. The third account followed in June, Desert Bright Cleaning Services, a residential and commercial cleaning company that had a real website and a real toll-free number that rolled to a voicemail box no one ever checked. The fourth, opened in October 2021, was the most elaborate. Tacos El Norte, LLC, a food truck operator with a real truck that drove a real route around construction sites in Rio Rancho and even did real business, generating real receipts that Lindholm would use to justify the bulk of the cash deposits that flowed through the account. The pattern, once it was established, ran like clockwork. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, between 9 and 10 a.m., a courier, usually Acevedo, sometimes a younger man named Ronaldo Salgado, occasionally a woman who went by Marisol, would enter the Montgomery Boulevard branch carrying a black nylon gym bag or a soft-sided cooler. They would walk directly past the teller line and into Lindholm's office at the back of the lobby. They would close the door. They would unzip the bag. Inside would be bundles of cash, always hundreds, occasionally 50s, banded in $10,000 straps that the couriers would break down on Lindholm's desk into the precise structured amounts. A typical visit deposited between $60,000 and $90,000 across 2 or 3 of the 4 accounts. Every individual deposit was held under $10,000 to stay below the CTR threshold. Lindholm would walk the cash to a teller, usually the same teller, a woman named Angela Mendez who never asked questions, and process the deposits across the 4 shell accounts. The Verifine alerts would generate within 24 hours. Lindholm would close them out the next morning before the assistant manager arrived. The CTRs he did file were falsified. When deposits crossed the 10,000 threshold by accident, when a courier brought too much cash and could not break it down cleanly, Lindholm filed a CTR, misattributing the source to legitimate business receipts. 41 of those false CTRs would be documented in the indictment. The signature line read, David A. Lindholm, BSA officer on every one of them. The SARs he suppressed were the ones his junior teller filed. Her name was Brittany Ortega. She was 26 years old. She had been hired by Pinnacle in March 2022 after working 2 years at a Wells Fargo branch on Wyoming Boulevard. Her training included a 40-hour BSA module that emphasized the obligation of every employee, not just the designated officer, to escalate suspicious activity. She took the training seriously. She noticed by her 3rd month at the branch that the 4 shell accounts produced an anomalous volume of cash transactions relative to their stated business activity. A residential cleaning service that deposited $60,000 in cash a week did not, in her experience, exist. She filed her first SAR on the Sierra Verde Grounds maintenance account in June 2022. The SAR was returned to her 3 days later by Lindholm with a note, reviewed and resolved. Member's seasonal pattern documented in CDD file. She filed a second SAR a month later on Desert Bright Cleaning. Same outcome. By December 2022, she had filed 6 SRs across the 4 accounts. All 6 had been closed by Lindholm without escalation. She kept filing. She filed a 7th in February 2023, an 8th in April, a 9th in July. By the end of 2023, she had filed 14 SRs into the system. Everyone had been suppressed. Lindholm's 4% cut, paid in cash by Chewy's organization at a drop site behind the same Furs cafeteria on San Mateo where he had first been approached, was stored in a stack-on floor safe bolted into the concrete of his garage in Tramway Heights. By the end of 2023, the safe held just over $87,000. In the back of the spiral notebook, he kept on the workbench above the safe. The annual total for 2023 read $43,800, written in pencil, almost exactly half his official salary. The 14th SR was the one that broke the system. Brittany Ortega filed it on February 6, 2024, on the Tacos El Norte LLC account. The food truck operator had deposited $47,200 in cash across 6 separate transactions in a single week, which was more cash than the entire Rio Rancho construction site economy plausibly generated in a month. The deposits ran $7,400, $9,100, $8,800, $7,950, $8,600, and $5,350. Every one of them was structured. Every one of them was timed to land while Lindholm was in the branch. Lindholm closed the SAR on February 9th with the same boilerplate he had used 14 times before. Members documented seasonal pattern. Resolved. Brittany Ortega did not file a 15th SAR. Instead, on the afternoon of February 12th, 2024, she drove to a Starbucks on Wyoming Boulevard during her lunch break, opened her laptop, and composed a 4-paragraph email to the Regional Compliance Office at Pinnacle's corporate headquarters in Phoenix. She attached scans of all 14 SRs she had filed, along with screenshots of the closing dispositions Lindholm had entered into the system. She did not copy her branch manager. She did not copy any other branch employee. She sent the email from her personal Gmail account and BCC'd her own work email so she would have a record on Pinnacle's servers. The email was opened at 3:47 p.m. that same afternoon by a senior compliance analyst in Phoenix named Teresa Quintero. Quintero had been with Pinnacle for 19 years. She read the email twice. She opened the first SAR Brittany had attached. She read the closing disposition Lindholm had entered. She opened the second SAR. She read the closing disposition. She opened a Verifin dashboard query for the Montgomery branch. and filtered by the 4 shell account numbers Brittany had listed in her email. What Quintero saw on her screen was a histogram. The x-axis was time, January 2021 to February 2024. The y-axis was cash volume, 4 lines, 1 for each account. Every line traced the same pattern, a steady upward slope dotted with hundreds of structured deposit alerts. Every alert closed by the same user ID, Lindholm D. Quintero called her supervisor at 4:11 p.m. The supervisor called the credit union's chief compliance officer at 4:38 p.m. The chief compliance officer called outside counsel at 5:02 p.m. By 5:30 p.m., Pinnacle's outside counsel was on the phone with a financial crimes attorney at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of New Mexico. At 9:14 the next morning, FinCEN received a 314A referral that included the names of all 4 shell accounts, the personal employee ID of David Lindholm, and a summary of the suppressed SAR pattern. Within 30 days, a joint DEA-IRS Criminal Investigation Task Force had opened a formal case. Within 60 days, a federal magistrate in Albuquerque had signed a Title III wiretap authorization on Lindholm's personal cell phone. David Lindholm had no idea any of this had happened. He continued to come to work every morning at the Montgomery Boulevard branch. He continued to greet his tellers. He continued to coach Caleb's 8th grade basketball team on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. He continued to take the Tuesday and Thursday morning deposits from Hector Acevedo and Ronaldo Salgado and Marisol. He continued to suppress the alerts they generated. He continued to drive every Friday evening to the back lot of the Furs cafeteria on San Mateo, where Chewy or one of Chewy's lieutenants would pass him a manila envelope containing his cut for the week. He continued, in other words, to dig. Before we go any further, if you've made it this far into the story, you already understand why this case matters. The compliance system in this country is not built on technology. It is built on people. One 26-year-old teller did the work that 14 senior employees and an entire monitoring software platform failed to do. If you want to see how the federal investigation closed in on Lindholm, stay with me. Subscribe before the next section starts. We cover one of these cases every single week, and the next one is already cut and ready. The wiretap on Lindholm's cell phone went live on March 18th, 2024. It captured, over the next 4 months, more than 900 calls and 3,000 text messages. The texts on his primary phone were unremarkable. Wife, son, daughter, a Costco delivery, the basketball league treasurer, a dentist appointment, a reminder to pick up dry cleaning on Friday. The relevant traffic was on the burner. The burner was a track phone Lindholm kept in the center console of his Tahoe. He had bought it at a Walmart on Coors Boulevard in March 2021, paying $39 cash. He activated it with a prepaid SIM in the parking lot. The phone had 2 contacts. One was labeled C, the other was labeled H, a representative exchange from the wiretap, dated April 23, 2024, H, 8:47 a.m. Pulling up. 2 bags today, heavier than usual. Use the south door. Angie's on register 1. Come straight back. H, same split, 40 across Sierra and Llano, 30 desert. Hold tacos. Verafine still hot on it. H, copy. Yours is in the larger bag. Stop saying that on the phone. Another exchange, April 30th, 2024. C, end of the month. Need account by tomorrow. Stand by. C, 12 minutes later. Today, David. 312.4 through the 4 for the month. Yours by Friday. The wiretap captured 41 separate exchanges that would later be cited in the indictment as direct evidence of money laundering conspiracy. On the morning of May 7, 2024, a federal grand jury sitting in Albuquerque returned a sealed indictment against David Allen Lindholm on 22 counts of money laundering, 4 counts of structuring, and additional substantive counts under the Bank Secrecy Act. That afternoon, at 2:14 p.m., DEA agents and IRS Criminal Investigation Special Agents executed a court-authorized search warrant at the 4-bedroom on Tramway Boulevard. Karen Lindholm was at work. Caleb was at basketball practice. Amelia was at the boarding stable in Corrales. The house was empty. Agents breached the front door with a battering ram and cleared the home in under 3 minutes. The garage was the second-to-last room they entered. The stack-on floor safe was bolted into the concrete next to the workbench. Agents drilled it open at 3:51 p.m. Inside, they recovered $87,000 in U.S. currency, banded in $10,000 straps, along with the TrackPhone burner phone, a 2023 Casio digital weighing scale, and the spiral notebook. The notebook was a Meade 5-star, one subject, college ruled, the kind of notebook a high school sophomore might use for algebra. The cover was dark blue with a Sharpie scribble on the front that read, MISC. Inside on the first page, the date 1/2/2021 was written at the top in pencil. Below it, 4 lines, Sierra, 0, Llano, 0, Desert, 0, Tacos, 0, Total, 0. The page for January 2024 read, Sierra, 184,000, Llano, 162,500, Desert, 104,81,200, Tacos, 198,700, Total cash, 686,400, 4%, 27, they know, 4 and 56. The back of the notebook contained the annual summaries. 2021, 19,200. 2022, 36,400. 2023, 43,800. The pencil markings were precise, the columns ruled with a straight edge, the totals double underlined in places. The handwriting was the same handwriting that appeared on the falsified CTRs filed with FinCEN under David A. Lindholm's signature. David Lindholm was not at home during the search. He was at the Montgomery Boulevard branch, 8 miles away, sitting in his back office reviewing a loan application. At 4:47 p.m. that afternoon, 3 federal agents, 2 from DEA, 1 from IRS Criminal Investigation, walked into the lobby. The lead agent, a woman named Jessica Rourke, asked the receptionist for the branch manager. The receptionist pointed to the office at the back. The body cam on Rourke's chest captured the next 4 minutes. Mr. Lindholm, Special Agent Jessica Rourke, Drug Enforcement Administration. This is Special Agent Tom Halverson, IRS Criminal Investigation. Could you step out from behind your desk for me, sir? Is there something I can help you with? Sir, I need you to stand up and step out from behind your desk. Can I ask what this is about? We have a federal arrest warrant for you, sir. 22 counts of money laundering, 4 counts of structuring, additional counts under the Bank Secrecy Act. Please step out from behind your desk. The footage shows Lindholm not moving for approximately 4 seconds. His hands are flat on the desk. His framed ACAM certificate is on the wall behind him. The Verifine dashboard is open on his computer monitor. He looks at the screen. He looks at Rourke. He looks at the door. There has been some kind of mistake. Sir, stand up, please. I have been the BSA officer at this branch for 8 years. There has been a mistake. Mr. Lindholm, we executed a search warrant at your residence this afternoon. We are aware of the contents of the safe in your garage. Stand up, please. The footage shows the exact moment the color leaves Lindholm's face. He puts both hands flat on the desk. He looks down at the surface of the desk. He does not look up again. He stands. He turns. He puts his hands behind his back. He says nothing else. Halverson reads him his rights. Rourke escorts him through the lobby. 3 tellers and 2 member service representatives are standing behind the counter. Brittany Ortega is at register 4. The body cam captures her face for a single frame as Lindholm walks past. She is not smiling. She is not crying. She is simply watching. In the back of the federal vehicle, Lindholm spoke only once, according to the agent's contemporaneous notes. He said, "I want to call my wife." The indictment was unsealed the morning after Lindholm's arrest. It ran 47 pages. It named the 4 shell accounts. It named Hector Acevedo and Ronaldo Salgado as unindicted co-conspirators who had been cooperating with the government since March. It identified the trafficking organization only as a methamphetamine and fentanyl distribution network linked to a previously charged supplier in Doña Ana County. David Lindholm was held without bail at the Cibola County Detention Facility in Milan, New Mexico, pending detention hearings. The U.S. Attorney's Office moved for pretrial detention on the basis of risk of flight and the substantial cash assets at his disposal. The detention hearing was held on May 14th, 2024. Lindholm was represented by a private defense attorney from Albuquerque named Daniel Rosenfeld, who argued for release on home confinement with electronic monitoring. The magistrate denied the motion. Lindholm remained in custody. Karen Lindholm did not attend the detention hearing. According to people close to the family, she had learned about the safe in the garage from the search warrant inventory. She had not known the safe existed. She filed for legal separation in late June. She kept the children. She continued to teach second grade at the charter school in the South Valley. She declined every interview request. The plea negotiations ran from August through November 2024. Lindholm, through his attorney, offered substantial cooperation in exchange for a recommendation of a lower sentence. He proffered the names of Shui, whose real name turned out to be Jesus Manuel Resendez Ortiz, and 3 other mid-level organization members. He proffered the locations of 2 stash houses in Sunland Park. He proffered the identities of 2 employees at a different financial institution in El Paso who had been performing similar functions for the same organization. The cooperation was deemed substantial. The U.S. Attorney's Office signed a plea agreement. On December 10, 2024, in courtroom 730 of the Pete V. Domenici United States Courthouse on Lomas Boulevard, David Allen Lindholm pleaded guilty to 1 count of money laundering conspiracy under 18 U.S.C. Section 1956 and 1 count of willful Bank Secrecy Act violations under 31 U.S.C. Section 5322. The remaining counts would be dismissed at sentencing. The plea agreement contemplated a recommended guidelines range of 87 to 108 months, subject to downward departure for substantial assistance. Sentencing was scheduled for April 2025. Brittany Ortega did not attend the plea hearing. She had, by that point, left Pinnacle Federal Credit Union. She had been promoted twice, and then, in October, recruited by the regional compliance team at a larger institution at a salary nearly double what she had been making as a teller. The recruitment letter, which was made public months later as part of a Pinnacle press release on internal reforms, described her as the kind of employee whose vigilance is the actual foundation of any regulatory compliance regime. At a victim impact hearing held in March 2025 in advance of the April sentencing, a special agent from the DEA's El Paso Field Division read into the record a summary of the downstream impact of the methamphetamine and fentanyl that the laundered proceeds had financed. Between January 2021 and February 2024, the organization that Lindholm had banked was identified as the source of supply for at least 1,200 kilograms of methamphetamine and an unspecified but substantial quantity of fentanyl distributed across New Mexico, West Texas, and southern Colorado. The DEA had documented 47 overdose deaths in New Mexico alone that were linked to product traceable to the organization. The presiding judge at the sentencing hearing, was the Honorable Patricia M. Coronado, a senior district judge who had served on the federal bench in New Mexico for 23 years. At the conclusion of the sentencing statements, before pronouncing sentence, Judge Coronado addressed Lindholm directly. "Mr. Lindholm," she said, "the Bank Secrecy Act works because every link in the chain holds. You were not just a link, you were the entire spine of compliance at your branch. You were the alarm. You were also, by your own admission and by the evidence in the record, the person who personally disabled the alarm 147 times. Once for each Verifin alert you closed. 14 times for each SAR you suppressed. 41 times for each false CTR you signed. There is no version of this case in which you did not know exactly what you were doing. There is no version of this case in which you did not understand the harm that flowed from the money you cleaned. You held an ACAM certification. You sat on a youth basketball board. You coached your son. And you came home from work every Friday with cash in a manila envelope. And you wrote the totals down in a notebook in pencil. The court takes no satisfaction in this sentence. The court is required only to impose it." Judge Coronado sentenced David Allen Lindholm to 96 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, restitution and forfeiture totaling $2,800,000, and a special assessment of $200. The sentence reflected a downward departure of 12 months from the high end of the guidelines range in recognition of substantial cooperation. Lindholm was designated to the Federal Correctional Institution in Florence, Colorado, a low-security facility approximately 500 miles north of Albuquerque. His projected release date, factoring in good time credit, is in 2032. He will be 57 years old. His son will be 30. His daughter will be 27. The stack-on safe in the garage of the tramway house was sold at auction with the rest of the contents of the home. The Meade 5-star notebook is sealed evidence in the case file of the U.S. District Court for the District of New Mexico, where it will remain for the statutory retention period before it is destroyed. Pinnacle Federal Credit Union, in the wake of the indictment, restructured its BSA program. The dual-role arrangement under which a branch manager could simultaneously serve as compliance officer was eliminated across all 7 branches. A centralized BSA review function was established at corporate headquarters in Phoenix. The 2019 NCUA recommendation that had been deferred for budget reasons was implemented within 90 days of the indictment. The system worked. It just worked because one 26-year-old teller refused to stop filing. This case was infuriating, but the case on the right-hand side will make you wonder how anyone with a badge could sleep at night. Click it now.